So Hadith is history. It is the history of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you must study it as a history with historians, muhaddithin, the specialized people who actually explain the context to you and what is authentic and what is believable and what is not.
So let's see what ChatGPT has to say about history. So I simply asked ChatGPT, what do you think about history? Isn't it simply his story, meaning someone's drawn narrative? So here comes the answer.
History is indeed a narrative, but it's more complex than just being his story or one person's account. The phrase his story plays on the idea that history is often written from the perspective of those in power, typically men in many traditional cultures, and that it can reflect the biases of those who control the narrative. There's truth to this. History, especially as it's been taught in the past, has sometimes been biased or incomplete, reflecting the viewpoints of conquerors, the elite, or specific cultural groups. However, history is also the attempt to understand and record past events based on evidence, whether through written documents, artifacts, oral traditions, or other sources. Historians strive for objectivity, though complete objectivity is often impossible. Today, more diverse perspectives are being incorporated into historical narratives. For example, feminist historians, indigenous voices, and post-colonial scholars are re-examining history to highlight stories that were previously overlooked or marginalized. So, in a way, history is a constructed narrative, but it can be constructed from multiple perspectives, not just a singular or dominant one. What do you think? Do you see history as something that can evolve with new perspectives or always shaped by those in power?
Let's see what ChatGPT has to say now. Brilliant. The answer is coming. It's quite a long answer.
From a logical standpoint, the reliability of a historical account written 200 years after someone's death can be quite questionable, though it depends on several factors. Historical records and narratives about a person written long after they lived may be influenced by myths, legends, biases, or incomplete information. However, that doesn't mean they are entirely unreliable. Rather, the accuracy of such accounts needs careful scrutiny. Key factors that determine the reliability of such historical accounts include 1. Primary versus secondary sources. Primary sources are first-hand accounts like letters, diaries, or official records created during or shortly after the person's life. These are usually considered more reliable, though they too can be biased. Secondary sources written much later can be based on earlier writings, oral traditions, or pieced together from fragmentary evidence. The further removed from the original event, the greater the chance for errors, distortions, or intentional alterations. 2. Transmission of information. Over time, stories about a person can be distorted, exaggerated, or romanticized. Oral traditions, for example, may evolve as stories are passed down through generations. In the absence of robust records, these narratives can take on mythical dimensions. 3. Cultural and political influences. The context in which the later historians wrote could shape how they depicted the person. For instance, if they lived in a time where the person's legacy was politically useful or harmful, the narrative could be skewed to reflect the prevailing cultural or ideological biases. 4. Available evidence. If historians writing 200 years later had access to a wealth of primary sources, letters, eyewitness accounts, artifacts, etc., their account might still be fairly accurate. But if evidence was sparse or selective, they may have had to fill in the gaps, making the story less reliable. Number 5. Historiographical methods. Modern historians have methods to evaluate the accuracy of ancient texts, cross-referencing multiple sources, considering the context in which they were written, and applying critical analysis to sift fact from embellishment. Ancient or medieval historians might not have had these tools or intentions. Historical examples. Alexander the Great's life is primarily known through histories written centuries after his death, like those by Plutarch and Arrian. Though these sources are valuable, they must be read critically because they were shaped by cultural, political, and philosophical trends far removed from Alexander's time. Jesus Christ's life is another example where the earliest written accounts, the Gospels, came decades after his death, and many historical studies were written centuries later. Scholars work hard to piece together the historical facts from theological interpretations and evolving traditions. Conclusion. Logically, a biography written 200 years after someone's death would be considered less reliable than contemporary accounts. However, it can still offer valuable insights if carefully examined and cross-verified with other sources. The key is to approach such accounts critically, acknowledging the potential for bias, myth, or error.